Hi, I'm Nan Simonson, and today is July 3rd. We are going to a 4th of July party tomorrow evening, and it's held by a couple that has done a 4th of July party every year for decades and decades, and they are fabulous cooks. They are not vegan, and yet when they have us for a couples dinner, they'll make vegan meals, and we do the same for them, and we travel with them, and they'll join us sometimes with vegan food and sometimes they won't. In any case, we're going tomorrow, and what Steve specializes in is his ribs, his barbecued roasted ribs. Well, we won't have any of that. What do I bring? Because they do the ribs, everybody else brings us something. Well, I bring baked beans. Fabulous, smoky, sweet baked beans. I always hope for some left over. What happens, though, I have found, is that whether or not somebody is vegan, they'll eat all my beans, and then I won't eat their food, and it's like, wait a minute, leave my beans alone. That, of course, doesn't happen, and I don't expect it. But I've learned that I better get a bunch of them when I start, because when I go back, they may not be there. So today's recipe is a recipe that feeds 8. I'm tripling it. So when you see these large quantities of certain things, it's because I've tripled the recipe so that I can do 2 pans of baked beans. They're literally baked in the oven so that they thicken and they caramelize at the end when you take the foil off of them. One of them I'm going to bake tonight, but the other one I'm going to bake just before we go there, and I think it'll still be hot. We'll carry it on a cardboard box and so that we're protected, but it looks great, smells great, and it'll taste delicious, but it'll have sat today and sort of married its flavors. So these baked beans, best vegan baked beans, are something that I got from, I don't even know who. I think I played around with it. Vegan Hugs, I think, was the initiator of some of these ingredients, but I've added a lot of other things. So I'm going to begin with a dry pan, and if you've watched my cooking, all of my recipes begin with a dry pan, meaning I don't add oil. I just got a vegan cookbook that was recommended by another vegan chef who is salt, oil, sugar free. And she said, I went to culinary school in New York with Chloe, and Chloe is, oh my gosh, her cookbooks are wonderful. But what I realized is there is a difference between vegan and whole food plant-based, because Chloe's recipes are very creative, and I'm sure they're fabulous. She even cooked at the Beard House, James Beard House in New York, and you have to earn the right to cook there, and it was a sold-out crowd, first vegan meal offered there to the crowd. But she uses things that I don't use, refined sugar. She's vegan, but refined sugar, coconut oil, white flour, in a lot of recipes. In other words, this recipe would have had tablespoons or more of oil or coconut oil, which is fine for a lot of people. It's still vegan, it's still good for the planet. But at 72, I think nutritarian, like Joel Furman's mindset is, if I put it in my body, I want it to do all kinds of good things for me, not just be okay, or taste good, or be vegan. I want it to be helping me at a cellular level. And so I don't use oil. I don't use processed oil. It's not a whole food, loaded with omega-6s that kind of crowd out our omega-3s, and that's what we're working on, is getting plenty of omega-3s when we're not eating fish, which we don't do. I don't do. I don't think our oceans are very clean anymore, and I don't want anything else killed so I can eat it. So here goes. I'm putting into this dry, hot pan my chopped onions. And remember, I tripled this recipe, so it called for 1 large chopped onion. Well, I chopped 3 large onions. And I want to show you what I use to do that, because it makes it so easy. to go over in a minute and make my Breville air fry, or my air fryer and oven stop beeping at me. I, every week, bake potatoes, sweet potatoes. I have a purple, hold on. A purple one, a red one, and a white one, and all through the week I have slices of those potatoes for lunch and if I want a snack. So back to how I slice or chop my potatoes with a recipe like this, and I'm going to turn it lower, and I'm going to show you, if you can see, that they're already lightly browning, no oil, but I don't want them to burn, and I'm going to add a touch, and this is the secret, a touch of broth. What's happening is they're deglazing the pan because the onion has enough of its own sweet moisture that it will kind of weep. I had this rather hot, or it wouldn't have browned this quickly. It would have just wept a little bit, the moisture, and then it sticks to the pan a little bit. Then I add a little broth and it bubbles up and deglazes the pan. You do this again and again, the onions become more and more brown, and they get sweeter and sweeter. But I haven't put all my onions in, so I better stop talking. This is called the Dahlia Chop Wizard. I have no affiliation with them, but I was able to chop 3 large onions so quickly because if they were sitting on their stem end and the stem and the top were cut off, they're sliced, not the way you'd slice to get round rings that way, but they're sliced, well, a way that you probably wouldn't slice them normally, and it comes in the directions. And then those slices are laid on this grid. They're multi-sized grids, but this is a grid size that I use for carrots, celery, bell peppers, onions. When I'm making a recipe where I want a consistent chop, I think this chili looks, or these beans look best when the onions are all the same size and they just kind of meld with the beans instead of a big chunk here and small chunk there. So if I take this off, this little plate, well, what happens is you put your slice, wham, and the chopped onion goes in there. And when I put in earlier, it was just I had overfilled it. In other words, that's how much onion I chopped. It even measures it for you. And so I'm putting in about probably, well, 1 big onion will give you more than a cup. Usually a cup, cup and a quarter, sometimes cup and a half if it's big enough. And so I have here, 3-4 cups of onion, 4.5 cups of onion. Okay, let me get this back up there again. I want it to continue to, I'm sorry. Now it's done and my potatoes are done. I want it to continue to brown and deglaze. And then I'm going to toast the spices that are going to go in here. And the spices will include dry mustard. That's dry mustard, smoky paprika. And I ran out of my smoky paprika, and I have a spice that is called pepperoni spice. It's something that Chef AJ just is so excited about. And I had purchased that at one of her recent conferences from the vendor. And I thought, well, if I don't have enough smoked paprika, I'll add a little of this extra, well, zippity doodah to my baked beans. So I have dry mustard, it would be smoked paprika. I have cumin and a little bit of crushed red pepper. And then the garlic that's going to go in pretty soon, because I won't put garlic in to brown the way I would my onions. Why? Because garlic will quite often burn before it'll brown in a very hot pan. So garlic is usually added at the very last minute for just a minute or two, if even that long, when you're caramelizing onions. just long enough to give it, well, to make it aromatic but not burn, because burnt garlic is always bitter. Now, I've done something a little different. This recipe just calls for garlic, 4 cloves in one recipe, and of course I have tripled the recipe, and so I've got a lot of garlic here. Well, I saw from Chef AJ as well as Tammy of Nutmeg Notebook that they buy their garlic from Costco, these big bags of peeled garlic. Whereas I've always bought the fresh garlic, the larger bulbs, and then peeled them, and I've shown on some of my videos how I can do that very quickly with this kind of silicone roller. And then chopped it with a very quick Tupperware chopper. Well, I thought, oh, well then I'm gonna buy my garlic that way. Well, I found that it lost its flavor too quickly unless I roasted it, and that's what they like to do, is roast it. So I ended up roasting almost the entire pound of it rather than keeping it fresh and then chopping it as I needed it. It didn't taste, I didn't find it attractive that way. I like freshly peeled garlic. But this roasted garlic, now I have, and what I did is after I roasted in the oven, you can Google roasted garlic, Chef AJ roasted garlic, Tammy of Nutmeg Notebook. And once I roasted it, I just put it, I let it freeze on a tray separate, and then, but it still stuck together a little bit when I put it together in a Ziploc baggie and put it in the freezer. All of this to say, I didn't have to peel garlic. I had this wonderful roasted garlic, and roasted garlic tastes different. It tastes sweeter and it has more depth to it. So I thought, why not use it for this? And I didn't have to peel, what would that have been, 12 cloves of garlic. Actually, I didn't have that much. I was gonna have to go to the store. Okay, so this is browning beautifully. This is getting caramelized. It's getting nice and brown. There's an ingredient that is, oh gosh, what's the word? I want to say debatable, but there's another word for it, controversial, that I'm using, because some people have none of this in their house. Well, one of the 3 or 4 recipes I looked at, and I'll do that, I'll Google a recipe, a dish that I'm gonna make, and then print a number of recipes and look at what they're doing and put something together. Well, one of the things that I put together here from that process was this next ingredient, because it was used by one of the chefs that shared their recipe, and I liked the idea, and I went ahead and used it. So what am I talking about? Bourbon. It has this marvelous smell. The last time I made this, I used the bourbon, and it was especially popular. The thing is, you may be thinking, wait a minute, man, I don't drink and I don't have any alcohol in the house. Well, then don't buy it. Just don't use it in here. It would be fine without it. As a matter of fact, the original recipe has no bourbon in it, but I liked this ingredient from another recipe. And I'll show you what you can do to cook away the alcohol, because you can put alcohol in a dish and most of the alcohol will evaporate, but not all of it necessarily. And I don't drink, and we had this, I didn't tell my husband because this is a really expensive bottle of it. We had this in our cupboard of things like tequila and Scotch and this bourbon whiskey, because we had some friends, we still have some friends that really like whiskey. And sometimes people won't let anyone drink in their house if they don't. And hey, I understand that and I can respect that, but I don't feel that way, and so I'm fine with it. But that's why we had it. So all of this explaining to say, if you don't want to use bourbon, do not use bourbon, but I am. Now, in the recipe, I say add it with the veg broth, which is what I did last time. But the more I researched, the more I realized that the little alcohol left. Now, in a pan this big and this little bit of bourbon, you're looking at a tiny amount of alcohol. But if you really want to burn it off, you would do what they do at restaurants. And I didn't add this to the recipe because I don't want people playing with fire, but I'm gonna do it right now. So if my hair burns up and I don't splice that out, you'll know this didn't work out so well. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is, this is hot and it's caramelized. Let me add my garlic and stir that around. This is, you'll see how nicely brown this has gotten. It's really quite nice. I'm not going to add any more broth at this point because I don't want to dilute it. I'm going to, and you have to be careful here. You want to make sure that you're not, well, you just want to be careful. All right. So, oops, fogged up my glasses. I'm going to turn this lower. Can you see how beautifully caramelized this is? This nice color. There's no burnt anything, just golden brown. See that? And now I'm going to add the bourbon. It's deglazing as I speak. And then, let's see if this works, people. And if I blow up the house. There. I don't know if you can see, you probably can't. Well, yeah, you can a little bit maybe. But the bourbon, the alcohol is being completely burned off. It's burning, it's burning, it's burning. I'm laying it flat. And yes, there is fire all the way around. I wonder if you can see this. Can you see that? So the alcohol is burning off. The bourbon is being concentrated. I'm going to stir it down. Whoa. Come on. This is why I said I'm not going to recommend that people play with fire. As a matter of fact, I'll extinguish it. And then we'll get on with the rest of what we're going to do. Wasn't that interesting? But why am I bothering with this? I love the smell of it. It's marvelous. There. Fire out. Caramelized onions. Oh, amazing smell. Okay. Now, I'm going to add the spices to toast them. So I have, what was that? Paprika. With what with it? A pepperoni seasoning mix, cumin and chili peppers, dry mustard, and I'm cooking them down. Okay, see, immediately I can tell that they are toasting. I am cooking them down, toasting them lightly. The smells here are so nice. I had to get out this big pot because even though I may have been able to squeeze all of this, triple the amount of beans and all of that into my, let's say 8 quart, I kind of don't think I would. If I could, it was going to be so tight that I would be almost mashing the beans to get all this stirred. This is wider and it's higher. This, I believe, is maybe 16 quart. No, could it be 12, 14 quart? Okay, now, moist, mixed, very flavorful. I'm putting in, and look at my tomato paste. Remember, all of this is triple. Why is it in squares? Why is it chunky? Because that's how I store it. I bought 3 cans of tomato paste and I flattened them out. I took a spatula and I just kept pushing them and flattening them out in I use Tivoli brand, and you can get it on Amazon, square ice cube trays. They're silicone ice cube trays, 2 tablespoons per square. And I think, I don't know how many squares are in it, at least 16, maybe more. The point is, by doing that, and then freezing the silicone, and then you can push them out really easily. A little hot water at the back, and then they just push out. Then put them into a Ziploc baggie. So I have 2 tablespoon increments of tomato paste. One recipe called for 3 tablespoons. Is that true? No, 1/3 of a cup of tomato paste. Well, 1/3 of a cup is 1/3 of a teaspoon short of 6 teaspoons, something like that. And that means that 3 of those cubes work perfectly for 1/3 of a cup of something, maybe a tiny, tiny bit more, but I call that perfectly. Okay, now I've mixed in the tomato paste, which was easy for me because all I did was defrost. In this case, I tripled it. So I defrosted 369, is that true? Of the, whatever it was, the bricks were. I think it was 6 bricks. 3 for each, yeah. 3 for each of my, no, that would have been 9. Okay. All right, now, what are we doing to add the best flavor of all? All right, first of all, it's not the best flavor, but the first thing I'm going to do, let me grab my spatula before I start with this. I'm going to put in date paste. Actually, this isn't date paste, it's date syrup. And then I didn't want to use that much of my date syrup, and so I used some maple syrup. So the recipe calls for date paste or maple syrup. And in this case, I had date syrup, which you can use 1-to-1 to date paste. Why would I even think of date paste? I seldom use any kind of refined sugar, even agave syrup. Agave syrup is much more refined than I want. So I usually use my date paste, which is just dates soaked and then whirled in a blender, and I have it on my website, nansimonson.com, to make a paste. What you're eating then is a date with the pectin in it, which helps thicken things in your recipes, and the nourishment of the fiber in the whole date. Date syrup is a little bit more refined than that. It doesn't have the pectin and it doesn't have the fiber, but it's still just dates that are, well, somewhat refined. And then you have my maple syrup, which is even more refined. All right, we're gonna leave that alone. And next I'm going to add blackstrap molasses. Isn't that interesting? Blackstrap molasses is, I'm going to use the word sulfurous. It has just a hint of almost a bitterness, which makes it really interesting. Well, we've got to break up all this sweetness with a little bit of tart, so apple cider vinegar. That's why I said that this is spicy and sweet. And instead of using salt, and yet we may use some salt if we feel we need to, I'm using tamari. And tamari is a soy sauce, the Japanese soy sauce that is gluten-free. And I don't do any gluten in my cooking because I am gluten sensitive. I actually have a celiac gene and a gluten sensitivity gene in my DNA. And then I'm adding Worcester sauce. And if you know anything about vegan, you're saying, no, Nan, you can't add Worcester sauce because that has what? Anchovies. And no vegan would eat an anchovy. So that's not, so if you get Worcester sauce that is vegan and vegan, pure, and mild. It's fat-free, low sodium, gluten-free, low calorie. It's Robbie's Worcestershire. Worcestershire, sir. I was never sure where we put the Shire in there. And then the last ingredient is hickory smoke. And I'm gonna wait until the end to put, no, you know what, I'm gonna put it because the last time I forgot to add it until the end, and I don't know that it blended as well as I would have liked. But be careful with this, I'm not tripling this. And this is, it calls for a teaspoon and a half for the main recipe. I'm just putting in a little bit more than that, but not tripling it. Okay, now I have this very thick base for my beans. And we're not going to use a lot of broth. The broth is measured out, but I may or may not use all of it. So what did I do for beans? I began yesterday thinking I was going to double the recipe. And I used Rancho Gordo Rio Zappa beans. And the Rancho Gordo is a bean company that does heirloom beans. They love their beaning, and what you get there is always top quality, a newer stock or newer crop, and you can depend on them, and they're very interesting beans. So these Rio Zappa beans are their hearty, dark, flavorful, very, very popular bean. I had 2 pounds. I soaked those. That's what I was going to do. And then I started worrying, because if I'm putting in all this time and attention, I want beans left. And I thought, I'm going to go to the party. I'm going to bring my baked beans. They're going to be eaten. Or people would say, oh, can I take some home? And I'm not going to say, no, I want them. And so I don't do that. And yet I would have no beans left. So I decided I'm tripling the recipe. How did I do that? Well, you could use in this, as the recipe relates, you could use Great Northern beans, navy beans, you can use cannellini or pinto or kidney beans. Well, I had Great Northern beans, which are a white bean. This is organic from Trader Joe's. I even had kidney beans. So I opened 2 cans of this because the recipe calls for 3 cans. So having made them fresh in my Instapot, well, dry, soak overnight, made them today in the Instapot, I had enough for a double recipe. Well, I decided to triple it by using what I had in the cupboard. And I think this is going to make it even more interesting. So I'll have some white bean in there. I'll have some red kidney bean. And those are rather distinctive looking. So I think it's going to make it look that much more interesting. And I wanted to show you this is my Rio Zappa bean, this dark one. And then the cannellini, and then the kidney bean. All of this goes in here. I ended up from 2 pounds of dry beans. I ended up with a little bit, well, about 8 cups of cooked beans. And then I added 4.5 more cups, because each can is about 1.5 cups. So I added 3 cups, which is 4.5 cups of beans. So I'm stirring them into this marvelously fragrant and rich sauce. Remember, baked beans are supposed to be a treat. Would I eat things with this much sweet stuff in it? Usually, nah, I wouldn't. But I'm going to add to them as they bake. I don't want them to get too thick. I'm going to add to them, well, 1.5 cups per recipe. So that's what, 4.5 cups of broth. And I may decide not to do that. I just want to see what this looks like, how it feels to me. I don't want them to be a sticky, gooey mess. Can you see how pretty this is? I'm so glad, actually, that I did the mixed beans, because they're more colorful. You can see the red in there. You can see the white in there. The whole thing will deepen, and the colors will kind of blend more as they soak in all of this, this richness. But I'm going to go ahead. Yeah, I'm going to use the rest. I'm going to use my 4 cups. They're going to be baked in a 350-degree oven, and then take the foil off. I mentioned this, and we'll caramelize them. So I'm going to pour this into two prepared pans. I have this one to bring to the party, and I sprayed, I've got a Trader Joe's can of, and it's a propellant that is a natural pump rather than propellants out of these cans where you don't even know what the propellant is, of olive oil. And the only time I use oil is when I'm doing something like this. I sprayed it in, and then I did what I'm doing now, and I wiped it off. And this is so I don't have things just stick like glue on there. And then I have this pan, and this is going to be mine. So these are going to go in here. They're going to bake. The sauces are going to thicken because there's so much starch in here. And when I take the foil off, I have the oven on at 350, but remember, I'm not doing the big one. I'm doing the small one first. Or I'm going to bake the small one first. And that might be dinner tonight, I'm not sure. But it will be something that we'll be eating out of and maybe even freeze some of for quite a while, and I like to do that. So I'll get back to you with either photos or one last video where I sort of put things together or show it to you just before we head out the door tomorrow night before our party. We'll see. We'll see what works out. But I'm going to bring this to a boil. I'm going to pour it in, and I think we're going to have a wonderful dish here. I hope you enjoyed this information. Play with the recipe, I always do. And if you do decide to fire it, be careful. You saw that it was a real fire and it came up the sides. And if I were using a shorter pot and I had a flimsy blouse with long sleeves, that could have been a problem. That's why I'm not recommending it in the recipe. You are all seeing something that they don't know about. Have a great day. I'm going to. And in the case of, well, no one's going to see this by July 4th. I hope you had a good one. This recipe would have been perfect. Great day. Bye. Hi, I'm back. I just wanted to show you the finished dish. Take a look. Doesn't that look yummy? I'm dressed for our 4th of July party. We're leaving right now. This is a hot plate, just took it out of the oven, and I'll be transporting it this way in a towel padded box that it'll fit in so that we can carry it, and it'll still be scrumptious for the meal that will begin a short time after we get there, and they're only about 10 minutes away. So I hope you're having a great day. I know I am, and thank you for watching. Enjoy. This has a lot of ingredients. It takes some time. I don't make it often, but man, what I do, I really enjoy offering it to friends. Bye-bye.